everyone. It's a lovely evening from my end. I am here once again to bring to us yet another interesting episode of the various natural processes that occur in nature. This is a follow up on the definition of science given. I have already defined science as the study of nature, the behavior and characteristics of natural things and natural processes. So for those of us that have been following these videos, you would have discovered that so far I've talked about various natural processes. I've talked about respiration and photosynthesis as natural processes, and I also mentioned that photosynthesis is the reverse or the opposite of respiration. I had already talked about that. Then I also mentioned osmosis and diffusion. We talked about that, the difference between osmosis and diffusion, and how the cell in our body, in the body of an animal, in plant bodies, are osmotic materials, and why we have water absorption, as some people perceive, that is the osmotic absorption of water under the active absorption mechanism. All right, but today, I'm going to be talking about two other natural processes. We're very much interested or concerned with what happens in nature as people who are scientific, people who are science oriented. We want to know what's happening around us, the what and the why. Alright, so today I'm going to be talking about pollination and fertilization. Pollination and fertilization, or as some people will pronounce, fertilization, as natural processes. We're going to look at the pollination, what pollination is, the types of pollination we have, and what fertilization or fertilization is in plants, and the kind of plants we're interested in angiosperms, not gymnosperms, or the non-flowering plant. Though the gymnosperm is not the only non-flowering plant, there are other non-flowering plants like ferns and mosses. They are non-flowering plants too. Then the angiosperms, the gymnosperms as well. All right. So if I'm talking about pollination and fertilization, of course, it's the organ of reproduction I'm going to be talking about, and that organ of reproduction is the flower. So the focus for today, the interest for today, is going to be that beautiful part of the plant we call the flower. And by the end of this video, we're going to understand that the flower does more than just beautify our environment. Most of us, when we think about flower, the first thing we think of is, oh, it's so beautiful, it makes the environment wonderful and all of that. But the flower does more than that. It's beyond beautification as we see it to be and as humans or as higher animals. All right. So please, it is important we note that the flower is a part of the flowering plant. Not all plants have flowers. The plants that do not have flowers are called non-flowering plants. Then we'll think about the ferns, we'll think about the mosses, we'll think about the blue-green algae and others. Then the gymnosperms as well. That is those pines and all that, the Pinus caribbean and other pines that are gymnosperms. So not all plants have flowers. For you to see a flower in a plant, it means that plant is a flowering plant or an angiosperm. So that's what we're focused on, that's what we're interested in, flowering plants or angiosperms. We're going to look at the role or the function of the flower, what the flower does for the plant, so that the next time you see a flower or the next time you see a fruit or a seed, you should at least know that, okay, this is coming from this part of the plant and that part of the plant. It is very important that we take note of this as people living on earth. Alright, so the flower, like I said, is the organ of reproduction. The flower is the organ of reproduction. What does that mean? It simply means that the flower makes seed for the plant. So plants can be propagated sexually via seeds. Though there are other means or other methods of propagation, that is the asexual propagation, where the vegetative part of the plant is used, like the suckers and other parts, for propagation. But we're interested in seed production, how the plant makes seed for reproduction. But there's something we have to take note of, very important. And what is that? Well, to take note that the flower, the function of the flower, what the flower does for the plant is to make seed for the plant. We have to take note of that. For those of us who are in exam classes and we want to take exams related to biological science, we have to take note of the function of the flower. The flower makes seed for the plant. Alright, so because the flower makes seed for the plant, we call the flower the organ of reproduction. That is where reproduction occurs in the plant. But the plant we're talking about, the group we're interested in now, is the flowering plant or the angiosperms. The angiosperms, that's what we're talking about. Or if you like, you can say the flowering plant. Alright, please, we will have to take note that for angiosperms or for flowering plants, before you see the fruits coming out, oh, this is mango, or for those of us who are science inclined, Magnifera indica, or the one we call African star apple. Some people call it agbalumo, the Yoruba people, the Igbos call it odara and all of that. But in the world of science, we call it Chrysophyllum albidum. So before you see the Chrysophyllum albidum, or before you see the Magnifera indica and other fruits, there's a lot of process, a lot of things has happened, and that is what I want to bring to our attention briefly this evening. Alright, so in the flower is divided into two main parts. The flower is divided into two main parts. I don't know if we can see this. I'm actually holding something. I don't know how clear it is, but for those of us who can see, or just to show you exactly what I mean, I'm going to be discussing these parts one by one. But this is the flower I am talking about. This is the flower. This is the flower. The various parts is actually labeled there. But it's not just enough. We know, okay, this is the various parts of the flower, but we need to take note of the function. So that's why I'm going to be mentioning the function of the various parts of the flower, so that when next you pick up a biology textbook, or when next you pick up any textbook related to biological science, and you see the flower drawn and labeled, you can reckon or you can relate with that, or it's going to resonate well with you. Alright, so the flower, like I said, is divided into two main parts. We have the male reproductive part of the flower, and we also have the female reproductive part of the flower. I just said that the flower is divided into two main parts. We have the male reproductive part of the flower and the female reproductive part of the flower. The male reproductive part of the flower is called the stamen. The male reproductive part of the flower is called the stamen, while the female reproductive part of the flower is called the carpel. The carpel, the pistil, just like we know. So if you don't want to use the word carpel for the female reproductive part of the flower, you can as well say the pistil. They mean the same thing. Alright, so when you're looking at a flower, which is an important part of the plant, you should know that the flower is divided into two main parts. Just as humans, we have the male and the female, various dimensions. Even in other lower animals, we also have male and female. We have the same too for plants. The flower, which is the organ of reproduction, is divided into two main parts. The male reproductive part of the flower and the female reproductive part of the flower. Now, the male reproductive part of the flower, which is called the stamen, has two main parts. Two main parts. And what are these parts? The anther and the filament. The anther and the filament are the two main parts of the male reproductive part of the flower, called the stamen. So if you're asked in an exam condition to mention the parts of the stamen or the parts in the stamen, I want you to remember that in the stamen is the anther and the filament. What does the stamen do for the flower? The stamen is there to house these two things I've just mentioned, the anther and the filament. Now, the anther makes pollen for the plant. Pollen grains are produced and stored in the anther of the stamen, while the filament is just like a stalk. It holds the anther in position. if you check your diagram, if you look at the flower, you will see that this we're talking about. Okay, up here you can see this. If you can see very well, this is the anther. The anther, those seed-like things popping up. This is the anther, and you see the straight lines here holding the anther is actually the filament. So we call the filament the stalk of the anther. The filament is the stalk of the anther. And what does it do? It holds the anther in position so that the pollen or the pollen grains can actually move. Alright, so we've talked about the stamen, which is the main reproductive part of the flower. And what have I said? I have said that in the stamen is the anther and the filament. What does the anther do for the flower? The anther makes pollen for the flower, and pollen is stored in the anther as well, and the filament holds the anther in position. Alright, we're going to move now to the female reproductive part of the flower. And like I said, the female reproductive part of the flower is called the carpel. And in the carpel, we have different parts. We have to take note of these different parts and their various functions or roles. First, we have the sticky stigma. I'm using the adjective sticky to describe that part of the flower so that it creates a picture in our mind that the stigma is sticky, and there's a reason for that, Alright, so we have the stigma at the top of the what's it called, the carpel. So if you go down the stigma, looking at this is our stigma. Okay, so if we just look this way, this is the stigma. Let me get it out so that, alright, this is the stigma. We have the stigma this way, if you can see very well. Okay, let me position this well. Okay, this is the stigma. Sorry about this, I'm just trying to make sure the lighting is okay. Alright, so this is the stigma. Alright, yes, this is the stigma. It's actually different from the anther if you look closely. For those of us who are very inquisitive, we can as well just pick up any biological science textbook and make sure that we are able to identify the stigma as a part of the flower. So the stigma is sticky. The stalk of the stigma, or what holds the stigma in position, is the style. So the style performs the same role as the filament. We should remember that the filament holds the anther in position. The filament holds the anther in position, while the style holds the stigma. It enables the stigma, be in a proper position to receive the pollen grains or the pollen. Alright, now down the style is the ovary. Is the ovary of the flower. Then in the ovary we have the ovules. Before you talk about the receptacle and the peduncle, but that's actually not my focus for now. It's just to get us to know the various roles of the parts of the flower and the role they play in what pollination and fertilization. Alright, so I've mentioned two main parts of the flower: the male reproductive part of the flower and the female reproductive part of the flower. We call the male reproductive part of the flower the stamen, and in the stamen we have the anther and the filament, while the female reproductive part of the flower is called the carpel. And in the carpel we have the sticky stigma, in the carpel we have the style, in the carpel we have the ovary, and in the carpel we have the ovules, O-V-U-L-E. O-V-U-L-E. If you want to make it plural, you just add S to it and it becomes ovules. So we have to take note of this. I just also mentioned that the anther makes pollen for the plant. But for a flower to make seed, so that there is going to be continuity, reproduction, there must be a movement, a transfer of this pollen or the pollen grains. So by the time pollen or pollen grains move from the anther, which is the male reproductive part of the flower, to the stigma or the sticky stigma, which is the female reproductive part of the flower, we say that the flower has been pollinated. So as a natural process, pollination is defined as the transfer of pollen grains, or as a transfer of pollen from the anther, which is the male reproductive part of the flower, to the sticky stigma, or to the stigma, which is the female reproductive part of the flower. It is very important that we take note of what pollination is and what pollination intends to achieve, or what we are to achieve as a result of pollination. But it doesn't end there. It does not end there, because the fact that a flower has been pollinated does not mean that seed will be formed or produced automatically. No, it is only when fertilization or fertilization has occurred that we can now say yes, seed formation is certain. Because once a flower is pollinated, it means pollen has moved from the anther to the stigma. But anything can happen at that point. Insects, or maybe humans, wind, and other natural disasters can disrupt that process, and fertilization will not occur. So, like I said, pollination does not always result in fertilization or fertilization, because for fertilization or fertilization to take place, the pollen must have to go down the style into the ovary to meet the ovules. It is when the pollen has fused with the female gamete, which is the ovules, that seed can be produced, and we can now say that fertilization has occurred. So, like I said, pollination does not always result in fertilization, because there could be disruption. If anything happens and the pollen is not able to go down the style to meet the ovule, then that flower, fertilization will never occur in that process. But now we have just said that there is a difference between pollination and fertilization. And what is the difference? Pollination is just the movement or the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma. But fertilization is the process that leads or results in seed formation. And what happens? The pollen goes down the style, gets into the ovary, meets the ovule, and a seed is produced. So fertilization is that process that results in seed formation. Though there is no way fertilization will occur without pollination, but the fact that pollination has occurred does not automatically translate to the flower being fertilized. We have to take note of that. It is very important for those of us, like I said, who are about to write exams related to biological science at various levels. It could be senior primary, checkpoint, common entrance, and all of that. Then even in junior WAEC and primary, junior secondary checkpoints, and those of us who are even in senior classes, we have to take note of these basic natural processes, because we can actually gather some marks if we are sure and we take note of these processes as well. Alright, so like I said, I mentioned pollination and fertilization as natural processes. They occur in flowers. We're interested in plants at this point, and the focus is on flowering plants, which we know to be angiosperms. They are flowering plants are angiosperms. Alright, so we have just said that pollen or pollen grains move from the anther to the stigma, and that is what we call pollination. There are different agents of pollination, and these various agents of pollination are known as pollinators. What do? They facilitate, they enable this transfer or this movement of pollen from the anther to the stigma. It could be birds, of course, when they go to drink the nectar of a flower. It could be insects, butterfly, and all of that. They enable pollination. But for this agent of pollination, or these pollinators, to come to the flower, they need to be attracted. Now, this will now lead me to the two other parts of the flower. Apart from the male reproductive part of the flower, called the stamen, and the female reproductive part of the flower, called the carpel, we also have other parts of the flower that are not parts of this male and female reproductive parts. The first one is the petals. Of course, the petals are the main attraction. With their bright, beautiful colors and sweet smell, pollinators are what? Attracted. When pollinators get to the plant or to the flower, they aid the movement of what? Pollen from the anther to the stigma. So the petals attract pollinators to the flower. and these pollinators are the agents of pollination. Apart from the petals, we also have the sepal. The sepal, S-E-P-A-L, the sepal. What does the sepal do for the flower? As a matter of fact, without the sepal, there will be no flower. Why am I saying so? Because the sepal protects the flower at the bud stage. The sepal protects the flower at the bud stage. When the flower is still a bud, that greenish part that envelopes the whole anther, stigma, carpel, and all of that, that green part that envelopes it is the sepal. So the sepal protects the flower at the bud stage. That is the function of the sepal. So we have to take note that apart from the male reproductive part of the flower called the stamen and the female reproductive part of the flower called the carpel, that there are other parts of the flower that do not belong to this category of male and female. We've mentioned the petals, I've mentioned the petals and the sepal, and what the petals and the sepal do for the flower. Like I said, the sepal protects the flower at the bud stage. The sepal protects the flower at the bud stage, while the petals serve as the main attraction. They attract pollinators, or the agent of pollination, that will enable the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma. Then we as well have the receptacle and the peduncle as other parts of the flower too, that we will not group as the stamen into the group of the stamen or the carpel. But it is very important for us to take note that pollination and fertilization are natural processes. We have previously defined science as the study of nature, the behavior and the characteristics, of natural things and natural processes. So pollination and fertilization are the two natural processes that occur. So as people who are science inclined or science oriented, we should understand natural processes and know why these processes occur and the significance of the occurrence of these natural processes. So like we have said, for a seed to be formed, the pollen must meet with the ovule. The fusion of the pollen and the ovule is what results in seed formation. Once the pollen meets the ovule, that ovule becomes the seed of the flower. And once the seed has been formed, the ovary turns into the fruit. So if you're eating a fruit, mango, whatever fruit, papaya, whatever fruit you're eating, you should just be aware that you are eating the ovary of the flower. And if you're eating the seed, say you want to chew the seed of a plant, you should know that it is the ovule that you are eating as well. It is important to take note of what happens once fertilization occurs. Very important. 1. The ovule turns into the seed, and the ovary turns into the fruit. So if you're eating the fruit of a plant, you should know the part of the flower you're feeding on. And if you're to chew or eat the seed of a plant, you should as well know the part of the flower that you are feeding on. Flower is a very important part of the plant. They do more than just beautify the environment. Of course, because of their petals, they are very beautiful. And the petals is not just there to fill our eyes, but they are there to attract pollinators so that reproduction, which is a natural process, can occur. So it is very important that we take note of these natural processes, not just because we want to pass exams. Like I will tell those people who know me on a personal level, that the reason we study is not because we want to pass exams. We study because we want to know, and if you know, you will never fail. For those people who study just because they want to pass exams, most of them end up not even doing well. But if you study because you want to know, one, there will be no tension. You will be so relaxed, and you will not see examination as any big deal. I want to crave your indulgence, so please keep following this channel. For those of us who are yet to subscribe to the channel, because there are lots of interesting things that is going to come across us. And another benefit of subscribing is you get notification, personal notification, once a video or I upload videos. My videos promises to be purely academical. I'm never going to publish or upload anything that is out of academics. It has to be academical and everyone can relate, whether those in primary, senior secondary, and those of us who are even in the university. You can as well relate with the videos that I'm going to be uploading. So, as we anticipate many more interesting videos to come, I want you to keep watching. I want you to keep learning. I want you to make sure that you follow through. And feel very free to make comments below at the comment section. If you feel that there is any particular topic you want me to address, anything that is a challenge to you, mathematics, English, physics, chemistry, biology, ecology, physiology, as it has to do with the plant physiology though, not the physiology of the human body, plant physiology and all of that. If you feel that there's anything you really want us to talk about mainly, you can just drop a comment section. Drop it there on the comment section. I'm going to respond immediately I see that. I'm saying it once more. Just hit on the subscribe button. Subscribe to the channel so you get personal notification when videos like this are uploaded. Thank you. Continue to stay safe. Continue to study to show yourself approved.